Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is May 4th, 2026, and tonight's episode is all about the Epstein files, what the records actually show, and what they don't. So, my wife's mother came up to me, asked me a question, and she's like, I can't remember what the question was, but something about Trump. She's like, and then she said, what, you don't support Trump? And right when I was going to give her an explanation, our conversation got interrupted, and then we never had that conversation. And so it got me thinking. One thing I have not done is I have not downloaded all the Epstein files and actually did my own due diligence on information. And I wanted to find out if it was true from all the rumors we've heard. Did Trump get on the Lolita Express 13 times? And I got to say, I was pretty shocked at what I found. Really shocked. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. The Epstein case, guys, has become one of the most misrepresented investigations in modern history, not because there is no evidence, but because there is too much of it. Scattered across incompatible systems, court filings, FBI releases, flight logs, contact books, and testimony transcripts, I have them all, are often merged into a single narrative, creating the illusion of a unified record. Now, this show tonight breaks that illusion apart and rebuilds the case from the ground up, using only what can be verified in the documents themselves. And the analysis reveals that there is no single Epstein list. Instead, there are separate data layers, each with its own purpose, limitations, and evidentiary weight. Court documents focus narrowly on specific allegations tied to litigation. FBI document investigative processes, but are heavily redacted and incomplete. I found some that were not redacted. Flight logs show travel patterns, but omit passengers and contain inconsistencies. I found that flight log and found the unredacted version. Contact books show networks of communication, not necessarily criminal involvement. I found that too. And when these layers are separated and examined independently, a very clear picture emerges, one that is less sensational but far more precise. Well, within that framework, claims about specific individuals can be tested directly against the records. The data shows that Donald Trump appears once in the flight logs on a 1997 trip from Florida to New Jersey. Appears indirectly through family contacts in the black book. Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein had a black book, and I found the one that was unredacted. And is referenced in testimony without any supporting allegations of wrongdoing. This stands in contrast to circulating claims of repeated flights or direct involvement, which are not supported in the data sets examined. So the deeper story is not about a hidden list of names. It is about the structure of the records themselves. Massive redactions, missing pages, inconsistent logs, and compartmentalized data systems create a fragmented archive that can be easily misinterpreted until you go and find the information, which I have to thank Russia because I found this off of Russia's search engines. The real issue is not simply what's in the files, but how the files are constructed, what is withheld, and how partial information is turned into definitive claims. Well, this show does not speculate beyond the documents. It demonstrates how to test claims against evidence, how to separate verified data from narrative, and how to understand the limits of what the Epstein files can and cannot prove. I'm excited about tonight's show. Looking forward to it. Shout out to everybody on the live chat rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion says, hey, Pastor and Warrior family, glad to see y'all again. Nice to have you two here as well, Scorpion. Boots, the Spark and Spleefer, the number one uno amuno, the Powder King himself. Boot says, hello, James and Warrior Family Salad. Hey, see y'all here, and let's all hit that thumbs up button and make our host Rumble famous, savvy. And he says, and don't forget to tell a friend about James's award-winning detox formula. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, elitepotion.com. Remove the parasites and heavy metals and feel better. I'm telling you, this is the best product on the market. And eventually one day it will take off. It's just not taking off now, but that's okay. I also wanted to let you guys, and hey, help me give a thumbs up. Do me a favor. Rumble only judges me based on how many likes I have, so I have to tell you guys to give me likes. Otherwise, Rumble won't put this or my show anywhere. So if you can, do me a favor, follow my thumb down to your cell phone, just like I'm doing on this, right? I'm right with you. Hit the X and then hit the thumbs up. If you do so, I will be happy. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate that. So yesterday, I want to explain, I went to the gold mine. I had to grab my motor, which unfortunately a windstorm came through my mine and blew the tarp off of all of my equipment, and rain and then dirt all just compacted down on all of my equipment, settling in with a lot of rust, a lot of problems, broken equipment, etc., especially my motor, which I used to pump water into the sluice. And unfortunately, I could not get it started. When I opened up the gas chamber, the oil itself, they were completely, wet. And so this is a problem. I cannot lift this motor, this engine, up and walk it over all of the rocks that I have that get you to the mine. So I have to float downstream to the trail that goes up to where my van would be. And I had to yesterday go there, take some newer equipment. What I did was I bought some big plastic boxes, right? Heavy duty plastic boxes that should outlast weather. And I placed those on the spot where I have my equipment so I don't need to use the tarp anymore, and then placed all the equipment in there, grabbed all of the rusty stuff, including my engine, and then float back down the river. So what I was doing was floating upstream. I have to swim upstream, and believe me, there's a part where the stream's coming down, and I am literally swimming as hard as I can, and I'm not barely inching anywhere. Plus, I got a bunch of heavy shit tied on my belly behind me on another raft, and I'm doing this on my raft, and there's a raft behind me, and I'm trying to get up there. It was a pain in the ass. And while I was doing it, lightning was striking everywhere, and it was getting ready to rain, and I was like, oh my God. Now, what I thought was going to be maybe a hour to 2 hour adventure turned out to be a lot longer than I thought. And as I was heading back home, I was like, I think I can make it. I think I can make it, until I realized that I wouldn't have been here until 9:30, and that sucks. So I decided I'm just too tired, and I just let it go. Now, I'm sorry about that. I know you guys were looking forward to the show, but that's just how it is. Let's get into breaking news. You know what I forgot to play?
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
I don't know why I have that as a separate file, but I forgot to play it. I need to just put them into one, and that's how it goes. All right, so U.S. and Iranian militaries trade shots as the Strait of Hormuz tensions escalate. Yeah, well, what it really looks like to me is Iran has lost all control, and that's just what I see. I'm not on any Secret Service list to get information, nor am I getting paid to receive information. So there you have it. I think it's pretty much winding down. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we do know that China has been storing oil for reserves, and they have about 3 months worth of oil. And after 3 months, they'll cave. Well, they'll cave. They'll have to buy oil through the U.S. dollar. That's the whole deal. That's what I'm thinking, but I could be wrong. So this war could stretch out for another couple months. Secret Service shoots and wounds armed man near Washington Monument. All the crazies are out, want to kill the president. Well, there's really nothing. If you kill the president, nothing happens after. Another one comes in and does the same thing. I mean, absolutely insane why you would want to try to kill the president, because killing the president isn't going to stop the machine. All right. All you're doing is it's like taking the battery, taking the one of the plugs on your battery off so it doesn't start. That's all you're doing. And then after you shoot the president, then they just put the battery on and turn the truck over and it moves. I don't understand this mentality of people killing presidents. It doesn't do anything. Okay, you go, well, what about Lyndon Johnson? What about, well, maybe back then, but not today. Okay, they've put in fail safes now. When you get rid of the president, they're going to have backups. That's what I'm saying. So let's stop trying to kill the president. What is this, a fourth attempt? Okay. And I know, yeah, some of them could be faked by the president himself, which is not a bad idea, just to get people to not shoot him. If you stage all of them, then people will be like, well, no one can get to it anyway. So that's brilliant. Justices Jackson and Alito spar. Oh, they start yelling at each other over Supreme Court decision to expedite Louisiana redistricting ruling. Well, everyone wants to win, so they're all going to yell at each other. Okay, that's a left and a right Supreme Court judge, and they're like, I don't like you. And the other one's like, I don't like you either. And they're sparring over, hey, is gerrymandering a good idea or not? Should it be illegal? Well, why don't you guys just duke it out? I would love to see that fight. Let's see her punch him and him punch her. And in a ring, of course, with an audience. And let's raise money for the 8,000 children that die from starvation every single day in the world. Like if they could ever figure that one out. Top Democrat aims for New York redistricting after Supreme Court's voting. So Democrats are aiming towards New York. Yeah, we can redistrict. Let's go this way. Let's go that way. Whatever. Guys, the left and the right cheat. Okay? They all do. Because money's on the line. Big money. And don't assume that everything in America is like apple pie and sunny days. Dude, corporations will do anything they can to get more power or get into power, and that includes cheating. That's just how the world is. You live in a fallen world. They cheat to get power. According to the Associated Press, which is a London-based outfit, the #1 news agency in the world who everyone else reads, so don't talk about monopoly to me. Washington Post, Reuters, and Minnesota Star Tribune among Pulitzer Prize winners. Ooh, who gives a shit? Trump tries to downplay economic effects of the Iran war. Well, I would too. Gas is now $100, $150, sometimes $200 to fill your truck in your car. It's probably $60 to $80. Well, who do you think? Well, think Trump. He's the one that went to war with Iran, you know? I mean, gas prices are down a little bit, but still, they're never going to go back down to the $3 that you guys used to pay. Now, it's gone. It's over. So get over it. It's not me. It's them. All right, when we come back, we're going to be talking about the Epstein files. What records actually show and what the records don't show. Look. Was a sicko. What can I say?
We are being lied to about our sovereignty, about our health, about birth, and about what's actually best for our families. And most women don't even realize it until they're already in the system. Hi, my name is Lisa, the Sovereign Woman. I'm going live every single day for 31 days at 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on YouTube and TikTok. This is for the woman who knows there has to be another way. A way to give birth without fear, without being controlled, without giving up her authority. Inside these lives, I'm teaching you how to surrender to God, trust your body, and step into a truly sovereign and fearless birth. Not from hype, not from rebellion, but from truth. So if you feel that pull, like something isn't right, like you were made for more than what you've been told, come join me. I'll see you live.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
All right, guys, we're back. The Epstein files, what the records actually show and what they don't. So there is a difference between searching for truth and repeating what feels like the truth. Now, most people never realize that difference because the information that they are given is already shaped for them, thanks to our paid-off media. Names are grouped together. Claims are repeated until they sound established. Lists are passed around as if they are complete. And over time, what began as fragments becomes a story that feels whole, even when it is not. What we are dealing with in the Epstein case is not a lack of information. It's the opposite, which shocked me. There is an overwhelming amount of material, court filings, FBI records, flight logs, contact books, testimony transcripts, but none of it was designed to function as a single unified record. Each piece was created for a specific purpose, within a specific context, under specific legal constraints. When those pieces are removed from their context and merged together, they create something that looks like clarity, but is actually distortion. The responsibility is not to accept what is being said about these files. The responsibility is to go into the files themselves and test what is being claimed against what is actually written. That means slowing down. That means separating documents by type. That means recognizing that not every mention is evidence, not every record is complete, and not every absence is meaningful. It also means accepting that some questions will not have complete answers, not because the truth does not exist, but because the available record, well, it's incomplete. Now, this is not about defending anyone. It's not about accusing anyone. It is about refusing to build conclusions on unstable ground. This is something I've been working at for months, trying to stabilize myself from rumor. Now, if it is not visible, then it remains a claim, not evidence. And the difference between those two is where credibility is either built or lost. Well, tonight, it's not about exposing a hidden list. It is about exposing how the idea of a list was created in the first place and why it continues to shape how people think about this case. Because once you understand the structure of the records, the noise falls away, and what remains is something much simpler, much clearer, and much harder to manipulate. So there is a phrase that has shaped how people think about the entire case: the Epstein files. It sounds singular. It sounds complete. It sounds somewhere there exists a unified archive, a master record that lays everything out clearly. And that assumption is the foundation of most of what the confusion surrounding this case is, because it is not simply true. There is no single Epstein file. What exists instead is a fragmented system of records that were never designed to be combined. And each set of the documents was created for a different purpose, under different legal constraints, and at a different point in time. And when those records are pulled out of context and merged together, which we can't do with the Bible, as we've learned over the examination between the Ethiopian and the King James, and how people will take just cuts and pieces of the Bible and then put them together and say, this is the truth. Well, it's out of context. Then they create the illusion of a complete picture. But that picture is artificial. It is built from pieces that do not naturally fit together. So start with the court documents. These came from cases like Jeffrey versus Maxwell filings or Guffrey versus Maxwell filings. Now, these are not investigative reports. They are not network maps. They are not attempts to document everyone associated with Epstein. They are legal instruments designed to prove or disprove very specific claims. Every question, every deposition, every document request is tied to the narrow scope of the case being argued. If a name appears, it appears because it is relevant to that specific legal argument. If a name does not appear, it does not mean that person had no connection. It simply means they were not relevant to that particular line of questioning. Now move to the FBI files. These are often treated as if they represent the full investigation. Well, they do not. What is publicly available through the FBI vault is a FOIA release, selected documents that have been processed for public disclosure. They include interview summaries, tips, internal communications, and procedural records. They are heavily redacted. Entire pages are removed. Names are withheld. Sources are protected. These files show how the investigation moved, not everything the investigation found. They are a window into process, but not a complete record of conclusions. Then there are the flight logs. These are often treated as definitive proof of who was involved, but flight logs are operational records. They track aircraft movement, not intent, not activity, and not necessarily even complete passenger lists. I found the original. My own data set already shows inconsistencies, missing names. Like I was saying, it's not complete, but it's the best I could do. So my own data set shows inconsistencies, missing names, generalized entries, and legal arguments that the logs were incomplete or altered in transmission. A flight log can show that a plane moved from one location to another and that certain names were recorded. It cannot by itself prove why someone was there, what they did, or whether every passenger was documented. Now, the same applies to the contact book, often called the Black Book, Jeffrey Epstein's little black book. Now, this is not a list of participants. It is a directory. It contains names, phone numbers, addresses, assistants, and secondary contacts. People appear in it because they were reachable, not because they were involved in criminal activity. In my own copy, and I found it, and believe me, there was heavily redacted ones and some that were not. It includes public figures, business contacts, and extended networks. Some names that people expect to see are not there. Others appear who are never mentioned anywhere else. That alone should tell you something. It is not a comprehensive or definitive map. And when these data sets are taken separately, their limitations are clear. When they are combined without distinction, those limitations disappear. And that is where the problem begins. A name from a contact book gets treated the same as a name in a deposition. A mention in an FBI tip gets treated the same as a confirmed event in a flight log. And I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans and Trump, all of them are all over the place in this. So a question asked in court gets treated as if it were an established fact. Well, the boundaries between document types collapse, and what remains is a narrative that feels complete, but is built on mixed categories of information. This is just logic. And this is how the idea of a single Epstein file was created. Not because such a file exists, but because multiple incomplete records were blended together until they appeared to form one. Once that assumption takes hold, every new document is interpreted as if it were of that unified system. So people start asking, well, is this name in the files? As if there were one place to look, one standard inclusion, one level of proof, but there isn't. What there actually is a layered system. Legal records that prove specific claims, investigative records that show process and leads, operational records that track movement, contact records that show communication pathways, Each layer answers a different question. None of them answers all question. And yes, it had all kinds of pictures of Epstein, Jeffrey's, I guess you could say, victims. Picture after picture, picture after picture after picture after picture. So just because those pictures are in the FBI vault doesn't mean that those pictures are included with all of the members of Congress and Senate, left and right. Okay. But it's not that you could put those pictures and then take one of the allegations and then put them in each one. Well, that doesn't make logical sense either. Pictures are there. That's what Jeffrey was getting busted for. So before any claim is actually tested, before any name is examined, before any conclusion is drawn, the first step is to break the illusion. There is no single list. There is no master archive. There is no document that tells the whole story in one place. There are only fragments from the government, from lawyers, from courts, from the FBI, from police, from all kinds of different things. And you have to go through all of it. And thank God for AI. It would take a year to go through all of this stuff. There are only fragments, each one with its own context, each one with its own limits, and each requiring its own standard of interpretation. Now, if that foundation is not established, everything built on top of it will be unstable, because conclusions drawn from mixed categories of evidence are not conclusions. They are assumptions that happen to feel convincing. And once those assumptions are repeated enough times, they begin to sound like facts. And let's not forget, back in late of last year, in 2025, Trump did an executive order. I don't know if it's an executive order, but he did some sort of a thing to actually release all of this information. So what's in public is what he told everybody to release. That's a fact. And this is where the work begins, not by asking what the files actually say, but by understanding what the files actually are. Okay? So once the illusion of a single Epstein file is removed, remember, they're all over the place. The next step is to understand what each category of document is actually designed to do. The most misunderstood of these are the court filings, especially those tied to the case of Jeffrey or Guffrey versus Maxwell. These documents are often treated as if they are investigative reports or hidden exposés. They are neither of that. They are legal instruments. Every page exists for one purpose: to support or challenge a specific claim inside a defined legal dispute. That means the scope is narrow by design, and everything included or excluded follows that boundary. And you can see this structure clearly in the unsealed filings themselves. The opening correspondence explains that documents are being released on a rolling basis, and that certain materials are still under court review. Now, that alone tells you this is not a complete archive, okay? Let me just say this again. This is not a complete archive. We don't have the big picture yet. It is a controlled release tied to procedural requirements. And from there, the pattern becomes even more defined. The filings are built around requests for production, objections, and responses. For example, requests ask for documents related to specific topics: communications, interviews, media statements, or references to individuals. And the response often push back based on legal protections. You repeatedly see language invoking attorney-client privilege, work product protection, confidentiality, relevance limitations. Well, these are not incidental phrases. They define what the court will and will not allow into record. Entire categories of information can be withheld if they fall under those protections. So that means what you are reading is not simply what exists, it is what has been permitted to be disclosed under legal rules. One section illustrates this very clearly. When asked to produce documents referencing Ghislaine Maxwell, the response states that documents have been produced within a specific numbered range and that additional materials will be supplemented as allowed. Now, that tells you two things at once. There is a defined subset of documents being shared, and there are potentially more documents that are either still being reviewed or not being released at all. Another section shows how even basic requests are constrained. When asked for all documents concerning communications with media outlets, the response again limits production to non-privileged documents and states that supplementation will continue. The phrase non-privileged is doing all the work there. It means the record that you see is filtered before it ever reaches the public. Now, this filtering is not evidence of concealment in itself. It is how civil litigation functions. But it does mean that the record is incomplete by definition. You are not seeing everything that exists. You are seeing what survives the legal process of objection, limitation, and disclosure. The same structure applies to how names appear in these documents as well. Names are not included because someone is part of a broad network. They are included because they are relevant to a specific question being asked in the case. If a request concerns statements made to media, when the only individuals connected to those statements will appear. If a request concerns alleged events within a defined period of time, then only those tied to that framework will be included. So you can, and again, we're just talking about case law, all of the evidence of court for Epstein and Ghislaine. Now, you can see this narrowing even in how time is handled. One filing explicitly pushes back against an overly broad date range and attempts to restrict the relevant period to specific years tied to the alleged events. Now, that means even the timeline is negotiated. The court record is not a full historical account. It is a legally bounded slice of time. So this is why treating those documents as a client list or a complete network map leads to false conclusions. As much as I want to bust the bad guys, these are just snippets of things that were released in court. There is stuff that wasn't released. Does that make sense? And believe me, it wasn't like Jeffrey didn't have financial dealings. He was moving money, making money. And just because someone bought financial shares of something that Jeffrey was doing doesn't mean that that person is a pedophile. So this is why treating these documents as a client list or a complete network map leads to false conclusions. The absence of a name does not mean absence of contact. It means absence of relevance to that particular legal question. So the presence of a name does not prove wrongdoing. It means the name was tied to a line of questioning, a statement, or a claim being tested. Again, this is about being responsible, guys. We have to be responsible. I'm holding myself accountable and responsible to the information that I'm putting out there. And this is stuff that we've been conditioned not to learn how to do through school. They don't teach us critical thinking. They don't teach us to slow down and actually, before spreading a rumor, do some research. And I have to be honest, I was assuming that Trump wrote on Lolita Express 13 times because, well, I read it on what I thought were credible websites, but going through all the information, it doesn't look like it. Now, there is another layer to all of this, the difference between questions, allegations, and established facts. Court documents contain all three, often side by side. A question asked in a deposition is not a statement of fact. An allegation presented by one side is not proven conclusion. It's not a proven conclusion. A denial is not proof of innocence either. So these elements coexist in the record because the purpose of the court is to examine them, not to assume them. So this becomes especially important when reading deposition excerpts. A witness may be asking about a series of names. That does not mean those names are being accused of anything. It means the legal team is testing whether any connection exists. If the answer is no, that is part of the record. But the question itself still remains visible. And when taken out of context, it can be misinterpreted as an implication. So what do these documents actually do? Well, they define the boundaries of legal dispute. They test specific claims through a structured questioning. They filter information through privileged and relevance rules. And they produce a partial record shaped by legal constraints. So what they do, and no, I know you guys are thinking, oh my God, James is compromised. I'm not. I swear to God. Shouldn't swear to God. But I'm not. I'm doing homework. I'm doing my research. And I am not going to start pointing fingers until I get information, because it's the responsible and right thing to do. It's what God tells us to do. And I am doing godly work by doing an honest look at this entire thing. So what they do not is provide a complete account of everyone associated with Epstein or every event that may have occurred. They are not designed for that purpose, and they cannot be used as if they were. So once that is understood, the documents become much clearer. They are not confusing because they are contradictory. They are confusing because they are being asked to do something that they were never meant to do. And when read within their proper function, they are precise, limited, and structured. When read as a general archive, they appear incomplete and inconsistent. So that distinction is the difference between analysis and assumption. Now, the FBI files. It's process, not proof yet. If the court documents are misunderstood because people expect them to be broader than they are, the FBI files are misunderstood for the opposite reason. People expect them to be definitive. They assume that because the material comes from a federal agency, it must represent a complete and verified record of the investigation. That assumption is just as flawed as the idea of a single Epstein file. Now what you have is the FBI vault, which is not an investigation. It is a FOIA release tied to Jeffrey Epstein. That distinction matters more than anything else in this section. A FOIA release is not designed to provide a full narrative. It is designed to provide disclosable material, documents that can be legally released after being reviewed for privacy, security, and investigative sensitivity. Now, that review process shapes everything that you see across the files that I've uploaded. The pattern is consistent. It's consistent, and as far as I'm concerned. I am not reading a continuous story here, okay? I'm actually looking at fragments. Fragments of internal workflow, routine slips, evidence logs, interview summaries, subpoena requests, and administrative forms. Now, these are not, the mechanics of an investigation, not the conclusions of one. Now, you see this immediately in the structure of the file. So let me take a step back. What if one dude was in the room with Epstein, and another dude was in the room with Epstein, and let's say one dude was with Epstein and they were doing nasty things and the other dude wasn't, but all three were mentioned. You can't put that other dude in there. But that's what America is doing. We're putting them all together under one lump sum and assuming that all of them are pedophiles. Well, the case that was built against him and Ghislaine was against them and what they did, not against a list of pedophiles that did things with him. So that's another big thing to think about. So you see this immediately in the structure of the files. Pages are filled with headers like Federal Bureau of Investigation, case classifications, and internal tracking numbers. Now, there are references to case types such as child exploitation investigations, but very little narrative explaining how each piece connects to the next. That is because these documents were never meant to be read as a narrative. They were meant to be used internally by agents moving information from one step to another. Lawyers can send a FOIA request for FBI investigations and pull that information, and that is what's submitted to court. Doesn't mean that they have the full picture. It's only what could be released at that time. Then you hit the redactions, which there were many, and I found a lot of files that didn't have the redactions. Are they true? Are they real? Dude, I'm going off of what was given to me by the government and their websites, and given to me by Russia because they have the real ones in Russia. A bunch of websites in Russia had the real ones, and you can actually look at them side by side and go, oh, hey, that's it. And this one's redacted, and this is what it says. So entire sections are removed, names are blacked out, pages are replaced with deletion sheets showing exemption codes B6, B7C, and B7D. Now, these codes are not random. They correspond to specific legal protections: personal privacy, law enforcement sensitivity, protection of confidential sources. Now, when you see hundreds of pages marked as deleted or redacted under these codes, you're not looking at a small omission. You are looking at a structural limitation of the data set. So the file is not partially hidden, it is partially absent. So this becomes even clearer when you look at the deleted page information sheets shattered throughout the later parts of my archive. Now, these sheets list entire page ranges that have been withheld, not redacted line by line or removed completely. That means there are segments of the investigation that you cannot evaluate at all from the public record. And this is where the misunderstanding begins to compound, because people see the FBI label, they assume completeness. But what you actually have is filtered visibility. You are seeing what passed through the legal threshold for release, not everything that was collected or analyzed. Then there is another layer that is just as important, and that's the nature of the content itself. FBI files included 302 reports, which are summaries of interviews. They include tips submitted by individuals. They include leads that agents followed up on. None of those elements are, by themselves, verified conclusions. A 302 report documents what someone said during an interview. It does not guarantee that what was said is true. A tip documents what someone reports. It does not confirm that the report was accurate. A lead shows that an agent considered a possibility. It does not mean that possibility was proven. And we have to appreciate that too. Philip says, James, where's all the videos and photos from the New York, the island, New Mexico, etc.? Photos of what? I don't understand. You also said Ghislaine and Epstein are alive and well, most definitely in another country. I'm guessing somewhere in South America. Hillary does have the balls in that family. So this is not a flaw in the system. It's how investigations work. Agents collect information, evaluate it, and determine what can be substantiated. But when you are looking at a FOIA request, you are often seeing the collection phase, not the final evaluation. So that is why treating these files as proof creates problems. A name appearing in an FBI document can mean many different things. It could be a witness, could be someone mentioned by a witness, could be the subject of a tip, could be part of a lead that was never substantiated, and it goes on and on. Without context, these categories collapse into one, and the presence of a name begins to look like evidence of involvement. But the document itself does not support that conclusion. My own data set, which I found in America and in Russia, well, it reinforces this. The files are filled with administrative actions, subpoena requests, evidence intakes forms, digital data collections from platforms like MySpace and communication tracking. Now, these show that the investigation was broad and methodical. They show that the agents were building a network of information. But they do not show the full results of that effort, because large portions are withheld and others are presented without final determination. Now, this is where the difference between process and proof becomes critical. The FBI shows process. They show that something was investigated, that information was gathered, that steps were taken. But they do not, in their released form, provide a complete map of conclusions. They do not give you a definitive list of who was involved, who was cleared, or how each lead actually resolved. So that information may exist in full within the investigative record, but it is not fully present in what has been made public. So when people take these files and try to extract definitive claims from them, they are asking the documents to do something that they are not structured to do. They are treating fragments as if they were conclusions. They're treating presence as if they were proof. The more accurate way to read them is this. They show the scale of the investigation. They show types of evidence pursued. They show the mechanics of how information was handled. They show that large portions of the case are not visible to the public. So what they do not show on their own is a complete and verified account of every individual connected to Epstein. So that distinction is not technical detail. It is the difference between building an argument on evidence and building it on assumption. And us as Christians need to realize this. Now, once the FBI files are understood as process rather than proof, it's a process, the next layer becomes unavoidable. It is not just that information is missing, it is that the absence of information follows a structure. Redactions in the Epstein record are not random gaps. They are patterned, coded, and applied according to rules that shape what can and cannot be seen. Across the FBI vault material tied to Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most consistent features is the presence of exemption codes. And again, you can see them in the redacted lines. This is B6, B7C, and B7D. And we talked about these before, but we're going to bring it up again. This is where nothing is shown, or these are deleted page information sheets, where nothing is shown except the reason for removal. And the most common codes in my data set are B6, B7C, and B7D. But each of these represents a different legal boundary. B6 is tied to personal privacy. It protects identity information about individuals where disclosure would be an unwarranted invasion of privacy. BC7 is also tied to privacy, but specifically within law enforcement records, protecting individuals mentioned in investigative context. And B7D protects confidential sources, people who provided information to investigators under the expectation that their identity would not be revealed. So if someone was blaming or saw something that Epstein did, and their name is redacted on purpose to hide their identity. Now, when these codes appear occasionally, they limit specific details. When they appear repeatedly across hundreds of pages, they define the entire structure of what is visible. In my files, they do not appear occasionally, okay? They appear systematically. Entire sections are replaced by deletion sheets, listed page numbers, and exemption codes. Now, this is not partial redaction, it's full removal. And what that means is straightforward, but often misunderstood. The public record is not simply censored. It is curated by legal constraint. The shape of the data set that I'm analyzing is the result of decisions about what must be protected, not just what actually exists. So that has two distinct consequences. The first is that absence of a name or detail cannot be treated as meaningful on its own. If a section is redacted under B6 or B7C, it may contain identifying information that cannot be disclosed. If it is redacted under B7D, it may contain the identity of a source who provided information. So in either case, the removal is based on legal protection, not the importance or unimportance of the content. That means absence does not equal non-existence. It equals non-disclosure. So the second consequence is that the visible record is structurally incomplete in a way that cannot be resolved by simply collecting more public documents. You can assemble court filings, FBI releases, flight logs, and contact books, but if each of those categories contain legally enforced omissions, the combined result will still contain those gaps. The fragmentation is built into the system. Now, you can see how this plays out in the later parts of my FBI archive. Page after page shows deletion sheets listed large blocks of removed material. Now, these are not isolated pages, they're clusters, often covering entire sequences of the file. And in some sections, the number of deleted pages reaches into the hundreds. Now, that is not a minor redaction. It's a very significant portion of the underlying record. And this is where interpretation becomes critical. There are two common reactions to this level of redaction, and both lead to error. One reaction is to assume that the redactions hide definitive proof of specific claims. The logic is that if something is hidden, it must be important in a way that confirms a particular narrative. Well, the problem with that approach is that the redaction codes themselves do not support that conclusion. They are tied to categories of protection and not to the content of any specific claim. A page can be redacted because it contains a private address, a personal phone number, or the identity of a cooperating witness. And it could have been their cooperating witness' entire testimony. It could have been 56 pages. We don't know. But without seeing the content, you cannot assign meaning to the redaction beyond the category it falls under. And yes, all the information that I have is all the information that the news media has, and all the information that we could get and the news media could get for this story. So the other reaction is to dismiss the redactions as irrelevant, focusing only on what is visible. That approach fails for the opposite reason. It treats the visible portion as if it were representative of the whole. But when large portions are removed, the visible portion is not a complete sample. It is a filtered subset shaped by legal rules. So the more accurate position sits between those extremes. The redactions indicate that the record is incomplete. No, there were no CIA records released. I don't think the CIA releases records. And if they do, it's never the way that we want it. But they do not by themselves reveal what the information is or how it would change the interpretation of the case. They define the limits of what can be known from the public record. Now, this brings the analysis back to structure. The Epstein files are not just fragmented because they come from different sources. They are fragmented because each source is subject to its own set of constraints. Also, the CIA didn't have an open investigation with him, Philip. The FBI did. So if the CIA wasn't involved, they wouldn't have information to release. Flight logs are limited by operational recorded practices. Contact books are limited by their function as directories. And when you add redactions to that system, the fragmentation becomes layered. Now, this is why attempts to build a complete narrative from the public record alone often fails. The gaps are not incidental. They are part of the design of the record. The question is not simply what is missing, but why it is missing and how that absence shapes interpretation. Now, understanding that structure does not provide hidden answers. It does something more important. It defines the boundary between what can be stated with confidence and what remains uncertain. So it prevents the analysis from drifting into assumption because it forces every conclusion to account for what is not visible as well as what is. So in a case where so much attention is focused on names, lists, and connections, that discipline is the only way to keep the analysis grounded. Now, does it mean that Jeffrey was working with people and giving them hookers? Of course. But it doesn't mean that everybody in this entire thing was people who paid for the hookers, right? So we have to understand that. So, and if they were underage, their names would be redacted, period, because that's state law. There's no way those underage. So we don't have the info. So after court documents and FBI files, the flight logs are the records people turn to when they want something concrete. They look structured. They look chronological. They appear to offer a direct answer to a simple question. Who was on Epstein's plane and how often? Well, that appearance is exactly why they are so often misunderstood. The logs tied to Jeffrey Epstein are not investigative summaries or legal conclusions. They are operational records. Their purpose is to document aircraft movement, departure points, destinations, dates, and in some cases, the names of passengers as recorded by the crew. That is all they are designed to do. Everything beyond that has to be interpreted carefully because the logs themselves do not explain context. Now, when you look at the data sets that I uploaded, which I did, you're not really looking at a single uniform source. I have multiple versions of the same underlying records, meaning when I went to find this information, I went to multiple places and I just downloaded everything I could possibly get. And there are structured digitized entries and there are annotated versions used in legal arguments. There are handwritten pilot logs and each version reflects the same system at a different stage, original recording, transcription, and interpretation. Now, the presence of multiple versions is important because it immediately shows that the logs are not perfectly consistent. Differences appear between them, and that's pretty common. Some entries include names that do not appear elsewhere. Some passengers are listed generically as female or male. In certain instances, legal commentary attached to the logs raises questions about whether pages are missing or whether the records were incomplete in transmission. So that does not automatically invalidate the logs, but it does define their limitations, meaning all the information's out there that we can get, but if when the data was collected, someone took a couple pages out, well, we don't know. We don't know. So what the logs do reliably show is movement. You can trace repeated routes, New York to Florida, Florida to New Mexico, and the United States to the Caribbean. You can see patterns of travel over time. You can identify individuals who appear frequently in those records, indicating a reoccurring presence on the aircraft. Now, that is the strongest use of the logs, identifying patterns, not proving isolated claims. So where the interpretation becomes more complex is at the level of individual entries. When a name appears in a flight log, it indicates that the name was recorded as a passenger on that flight. It does not by itself indicate the purpose of the trip, the nature of the relationship, or any activity that took place during or after the flight. A log is not a narrative. It does not explain why someone was there or what they did. It only records that they were present according to the available entry. And at the same time, when a name does not appear, that absence cannot be treated as defined proof that the person was never on board. The logs themselves demonstrate that not all passengers were recorded in a consistent way. Generic entries, missing names, and acknowledged inconsistencies mean that the record is not complete. The absence of a name is a data point, but it is not a conclusion. So this is where the difference between data and claim becomes critical. And within my data set, one specific entry does show, no joke, Donald Trump listed on a single flight in January of 1997, traveling from Florida to New Jersey, alongside several other named passengers. That is a clear, documented-based observation, and it tells you that his name appears in the logs for that specific trip. Now, what it does not support is broader claims that the extent beyond the data. Assertions that he flew multiple times or a specific number of times, such as 13, are not reflected in the entries available in this data set, not what I could find. The logs that I have do not contain that pattern at all. And at the same time, because the logs are not complete, they cannot be used to make an absolute claim in the opposite direction either. They show what is recorded, not everything that may have occurred. And I also bring up this show because just recently Trump was being interviewed by some lady. She was going after him about him being a pedophile. And I'm like, okay. Never before have we ever had the media assume something like that to a sitting president, and he was visibly upset. You could tell, and basically saying, how dare you? And so, well, okay, if there's proof that Trump with Epstein was with children, I'm not finding it here in this information. So no entry suggests no recorded presence, but none of the categories established on their own intent, involvement, or absence of involvement in any activity beyond fact of just travel. So he did travel from Florida to New Jersey. Now, there is another layer that often gets overlooked, the relationship between logs and manifests. In aviation practice, a manifest is intended to be the formal list of passengers, while logs are operational records maintained by the crew. In the Epstein material, the two do not always align cleanly. Now, that discrepancy is part of what led to legal arguments that the logs may be incomplete or partially sanitized. Well, I didn't do it. Whether or not those arguments are fully substantiated, their presence reinforces the need to treat the logs as one piece of evidence and not a definitive record. Now, when the logs are used correctly, they are powerful. They can show patterns of association over time. They can identify reoccurring travel between specific individuals and locations. They can provide a timeline that can be compared with other records, court testimony, communications, or documented events. And when they are used incorrectly, they become something that they were never meant to be, a comprehensive list of involvement. And that is where overreach begins. A name in a log becomes an assumption of activity. A missing name becomes an assumption of absence. Neither of those interpretations is supported by the structure of the data. And the more accurate approach is the simpler, more disciplined approach. A flight log shows that a flight occurred, yes. It also shows that certain names were recorded on that flight. It shows patterns when those entries are viewed over time. Yes, it does not show intent. It does not show behavior. It does not show a complete list of all passengers in every case. So understanding that boundary is what allows the logs to be used as evidence rather than as speculation. So next is the black book, contacts versus connections. After the flight logs, the next document that people point to as proof of who was involved is the contact directory, commonly called the black book. It carries weight because it looks personal. It looks curated. It contains names, phone numbers, addresses, assistants, and multiple points of contacts for individuals across businesses, politics, and entertainment. Now, at first glance, it feels like a map of relationships, but that assumption collapses the moment you understand what the document actually is. The Black Book tied to Jeffrey Epstein is not a record of participation. It is a contact system. It functions the same way only high-level address books function. It organizes ways to reach people. That includes direct contacts, indirect contacts, staff members, switchboards, and sometimes multiple layers of access for a single individual. Its purpose is communication, not documentation of activity. And when you move through the papers and pages, the structure becomes obvious. Entries are not just names, they are clusters. A single listing may include a primary name, multiple phone numbers, office and home addresses, assistants or schedulers, and alternative spellings or related contacts. Now, this is not how an investigative list is built. It is how a network of communication is maintained. It reflects who could be reached and who could not, and who did what. Not who did what. So this distinction is critical because the presence of a name in a contact directory does not carry the same meaning as the presence of a name in a flight log or a deposition. In a flight log, a name indicates recorded travel. In a deposition, a name appears because it is tied to a question being tested. In a contact book, a name indicates that there was a method of communication available, and that is a much lower threshold of association. So the inverse is just as important. The absence of a name in the Black Book does not prove the lack of connection. No contact system is exhaustive. People can be reached through intermediaries, right? They can appear under different entries, and they can exist outside the specific version of the book being examined. A directory is also a partial representation of a network, not the full network itself. So my data set actually illustrates this pretty cleanly. The version of the book that I analyzed included, and I had many books. One was redacted, one wasn't. Includes a wide range of public figures, politicians, executives, media personalities, and each with detailed contact information. At the same time, certain individuals that people expect to see are not present as standalone entries. And that includes Donald Trump, which he wasn't there, whose name does not appear as a direct listing in the versions that I uploaded. So, however, the absence of a direct listing does not mean the broader network contains no point of contact. My files show Trump tied to, my files show entries tied to the Trump family and associated business contacts, instead of just Trump, but some other Trump family contacts, through shared networks, organizations, and secondary listings. That is consistent with how large contact systems function. They're not always organized around a single obvious entry point, but they do often reflect layers of connection rather than a single node. Now, this is where interpretation becomes disciplined or distorted. If a name appears in the Black Book, the correct conclusion is that there was a recorded method of contact, nothing more. It does not prove a meeting. It does not prove travel. It does not prove involvement in any activity. It establishes a potential line of communication. So, what I'm really saying, guys, is all the stuff that we're getting from people online saying, well, I read the list and this is what it is. And people saying, and the news media saying, Trump was on it 13 times. They didn't do their information. They didn't do their investigative work. They didn't, with an unbiased eye. Believe me, I want Trump to be the bad guy, okay? Because they're all bad guys. And even today, I had some dude I was talking to said he's got a source on the inside of the White House, and I'm going to be interviewing him. So look, I want them all to go down if Trump's involved too. And yes, Trump has lied to us about going to war, and lied to us about not what was the other one? Anyway, he gets caught in lies, and I don't like that. You shouldn't lie, just tell the truth, but regardless. Now, if a name does not appear, the correct conclusion is that there are no direct listings in that version of the directory, nothing more. It does not prove the absence of communication, and it does not rule out indirect contact. It simply reflects the limits of that specific record. And this was for his business, not for his Willie. Okay, so the mistake happens when these categories are collapsed. A contact entry is treated as if it were evidence of participation. A missing entry is treated as if it were evidence of innocence. And both interpretations assign meaning that the document itself does not support. So there is another layer that complicates this even further. The Black Book exists in multiple forms: scanned copies, OCR text versions, redacted editions, and reorganized data sets. Now, each version introduces possibility of variation. Some entries are clearer in one version than another, meaning I downloaded every single thing I could possibly get from America and from Russia, okay? Everything. Some names may be partially obscured or formatted differently, and that means even within this category of record, there is not a single definitive version. So who's who? Who's what? Which one's right? I don't know. But when you place the Black Book alongside the other data sets, its role becomes clearer. It is not the center of the network. It is one lens on that network focused specifically on communication pathways. The flight logs show movement, the court documents show targeted allegations, and the FBI files show investigative process. The Black Book shows how people could be reached. Well, each of these answers a different question. Who traveled? Who was questioned? Who was investigated? Who could be contacted? But none of them answers all four questions all at once. And this is why the idea of the list persists. People are looking for a document that combines all of those functions into one. There isn't any. Like, here's a list of all of Jeffrey Epstein's friends that he, did bad things with. It's not there. So when people say, give us the list, there isn't one. There's not a list of perps. Sorry. But the system was never built that way. It was built to separate records, each limited to its own purpose. And when those limits are ignored, the interpretation drifts. So the more precise approach is to keep those boundaries intact. A contact book is evidence of contact potential. It's not evidence of action. It is not evidence of intent. It's not evidence of wrongdoing. And it is one piece of a larger structure. And it only becomes meaningful when it is placed alongside other records that answer different questions. Now, used that way, it is informative, yes. Used as a standalone proof, but it becomes misleading. So once each data set is understood on its own terms, remember, they're all different data sets. Next step is to do what most discussions skip entirely. Take the claims that are circulating and test them directly against the records. Not against the summaries, not against the headlines, not against what everyone is saying, but against the documents themselves, line by line. Category by category. And this is where the difference between narrative and evidence becomes visible. Start with the type of claim that spreads the fastest. Numerical certainty. Statements like, this person flew 13 times. Well, that sounds authoritative because they are specific, and they give the impression that someone has counted, verified, and confirmed a pattern across the records. But when that kind of claim is tested against the actual data sets, the structure of the data immediately challenges it. In the flight logs tied to Jeffrey Epstein, the entries are not presented as a clean indexed list of all passengers across all flights. They are recorded trip by trip, and sometimes with full names, sometimes with partial names, sometimes with generic labels. There are multiple versions of these logs, including handwritten pilot records that I have and later transcriptions that I have. And when those versions are compared, inconsistencies really do appear. Differences in naming, missing entries, and questions raised in legal arguments about whether the logs are complete. Now, within the data set that I've assembled, there is a single entry where Donald Trump is listed. And that is as a passenger on a flight in January 1997. That is a verifiable data point. It is tied to a specific date, a specific route, and a specific record, and it can be cited directly from the logs. Now, compare that to the claim of 13 flights. When you search across the same data sets, across the structured logs and the handwritten versions and the annotated legal copies, you do not find 13 entries. You do not find a pattern that supports that number. And the claim exists, but the data that I have does not confirm it. And at the same time, the analysis has to remain disciplined. The correct conclusion is not that the claim is definitively false in all possible records. The correct conclusion is that it is not supported in the data set being examined. Okay? So don't shoot the messenger here. That distinction matters because it keeps the conclusion tied to the evidence rather than extended beyond it. This is all the evidence I could get. So the same approach applies to the Black Book. A common assumption is that if someone is connected to Epstein, their name will appear there. But when you test that assumption against the actual directory, the result is more limited. The book contains a wide range of contacts, but it does not function as a complete map of all relationships. In my version, literally, there is no direct listing for Donald Trump on any of the individual in that version of the contact directly. It does there is no direct listing for Donald Trump on as an individual entry. There are related names, family members, business connections, but not the standalone listing that people often expect. So again, the discipline conclusion is narrower. There is no direct listing in that version of the contact directory. It does not extend beyond that into assumptions about the full network. Now, move to the court documents. Here, the testing becomes even more precise because the structure of the record distinguishes between questions, allegations, and answers. In depositions excerpts, witnesses are sometimes asked about a series of names. The presence of a question does not imply that the person named is being accused. It means the legal team is exploring whether any connection exists. So in the sections that I've reviewed, witnesses are asked about Donald Trump and responding that they had not had contact of the type that's being questioned. So those responses are part of the record. They are just as important as the questions themselves because they define what the witness is affirming and what they are denying. The document preserves both, but they are often separated in public discussion, with the question highlighted and the answer ignored. So this is how claims become distorted. A name appears in a question, and the question is treated as if it were an accusation. Well, a single data point appears in a log, and it expanded into a pattern. A contact entry appears in a directory, and it is interpreted as evidence of involvement. Well, each step adds interpretation that the original document does not support. Sorry. James, did you watch the Bannon interview with Epstein? He was working with the Rothschild, etc. No, I didn't, but I don't trust Bannon either. Hey, he was on the inside with all of them. I don't trust him. I don't trust Trump. I don't trust Jeffrey Epstein. I don't trust Hillary. I don't trust Obama. I don't trust any of them. Believe me, if they're guilty, I want them to go to prison. But I don't trust any of them, okay? Anybody who has their own news agency and they're saying Q was right and all that stuff, I don't trust it until I can get some information, some real hard data that I can see, that I feel comfortable with giving. That's what I've changed. I'm getting out of the conspiracy theory business, okay? And I'm getting into real hard data. I'm actually becoming a journalist that America really needs. It's kind of what's happening, and I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just going there. Testing claims against the data reverses that process. It strips away what has been added and reduces each statement to what can be verified. Is the name of the flight logs? If so, how many times? Is the name of the contact book? In what form? Is the name of the court record? In what context, question, allegation, or answer? Is the name of the FBI files as witness, tip, or redacted reference? Each question is answered within its own data set using its own standard. And when that method is applied consistently, the result is not a dramatic narrative. It's a set of constrained observations. A single confirmed flight entry in the logs. No direct listings in the examined content directory. References is in testimony that do not include allegations of wrongdoing, and those observations may not match the intensity of the claims being circulated, but they do match the structure of the evidence, and that is the point. The goal is not to produce the most compelling version of events. It is to produce the version that can be supported by the record. So this approach does something else as well. It reveals where the data ends. When a claim cannot be confirmed within the available documents, that gap becomes visible. It's no longer hidden behind repetition or assumption. It becomes a defined boundary. This is what the records show, and this is where they stop. So in a case where so much of the discussion is driven by certainty, that boundary is the most valuable thing the data can provide. So by the time the analysis reaches testimony, the line between what is said and what is proven becomes the most important distinction in the entire record. Testimony is where people expect clarity, but it is also where misunderstanding happens the fastest because the format itself blends questions, allegations, recollections, and denials into a single stream. So inside the filings tied to Jeffrey versus Maxwell, or Guffrey or Jeffrey or Gieffrey or Giuffrey, I don't care. Testimony appears primarily through depositions. Now, these are not scripted statements. They are structured examinations where attorneys ask questions, witnesses respond, objections are raised, and the record captures all of it. And that means what I'm basically reading here is not finished conclusion. It is an active process of testing claims. So the first layer is to understand is the role of the question. In a deposition, attorneys will often move through a series of names, events, or possibilities, and they are not doing this because each name represents a confirmed allegation. They are doing it to establish whether any connection exists at all. The scope of questioning is intentionally broad at times because the goal is to identify or rule out potential links. So that creates a critical distinction. A name appearing in a question is not the same as a name appearing in a statement of fact. It simply means the name is part of the inquiry. My data set actually shows this clearly. In one portion of the testimony, a witness is asked about multiple individuals, including Donald Trump. The question is direct: whether the witness had any involvement or interaction with of the type being discussed. Well, the answer is equally direct. No. The witness denies having contact in that context and states that no such information was relayed to them. So that exchange contains two parts, meaning if they were talking about Trump having sex with a minor, that witness said no. So that exchange contains two parts: the question, which introduces the name into the record, and the answer, which defines the witness's position. When taken together, they form a complete unit. Now, I'm not saying that the witnesses was lying. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just saying that until we have enough evidence, we can't act like a corrupted system, okay? Just because the system is corrupted, which I believe it mostly is, doesn't mean you can act that way by spreading gossip. I'm not going to do it on this show. Highlighting the question alone creates the impression of implication, right? Impression, including the answer restores the context. And this is where the left is pinpointing Trump. They're saying because that witness was asked, even though the witness said no, Trump didn't do anything with a minor. Therefore, they take that part out and said, well, in court, he was brought up and he was on Jeffrey Epstein's flight log. And then the rumor spread to not once, but 13 times. Therefore, this is what he's going through. So the second layer is the difference between firsthand knowledge and secondhand information. Testimony can include both. A witness may speak about something they personally experienced, or they may describe what they were told by someone else. The record often distinguishes between these, but the distinction can be lost when excerpts are taken out of context. Firsthand statements carry more weight because they are based on direct experience. Secondhand statements introduce an additional layer of uncertainty because they depend on the accuracy of what was communicated to the witness. Both can appear in the same deposition and both are preserved in the record, but they are not equivalent. And again, this was in a deposition. This wasn't in a trial. So the third layer, when asked about Trump and his involvement, the third layer is the presence of objections and instructions not to answer. Throughout the depositions, attorneys representing Ghislaine Maxwell frequently object to questions on the basis of relevance, privilege, or scope. In some cases, the witness is instructed not to answer, and that means the record contains both the question and the absence of a response. Well, this creates another potential point of confusion. A question without an answer does not establish anything about the underlying claim. It indicates that the question was posed and that, for legal reasons, it was not answered in that setting. And without the answer, the record is incomplete on that point. The fourth layer is the differences between allegation and adjudication. Testimony is where allegations are articulated and challenged. It is not where they are resolved. The presence of an allegation in testimony means that it has been stated under oath and subjected to questioning. It does not mean that it has been proven in a court of law. So that determination requires a separate legal process. This distinction is essential when evaluating how names appear in the record. Some individuals are tied directly to allegations being litigated. Others appear only in the course of questioning. Others are mentioning in passing without any claim attached. And treating all of these appearances as equivalent collapses the structure of the testimony. And when the testimony in my data set is read within its proper framework, a consistent pattern actually starts to show. Names are introduced through questioning. Responses define whether a witness confirms, denies, or does not recall a connection. Objections and instructions limit what is answered, and allegations are presented but not resolved within the deposition itself. So applying that framework to a specific references leads to a constrained conclusion. In the sections that I've reviewed, references to Donald Trump occur within questioning, and the responses do not establish involvement in the activities being discussed, period. So that is the time of what the testimony supports in this data set. So the broader lesson is not about any single name. It is about how testimony functions as evidence. And testimony does not present a finished narrative. It presents competing accounts that are being examined. It preserves both the claim and the response, and it requires interpretation within its legal context. When that context is maintained, the testimony becomes very clear, even if it does not provide definitive answers to every question. When the context is removed, the same material can be used to support conclusions that extend beyond what the record actually shows. So in a case where so much attention is placed on individual names, maintaining that distinction is what keeps the analysis grounded in evidence rather than interpretation. So by this point, the structure of the record is very clear very clear enough to expose one of the most persistent errors in how the Epstein material is being interpreted. The collapse of different types of associations into a single category. That's what the media is doing, and that's wrong. They're lying. Names appear across data sets, flight logs, contact directories, testimony, and investigative files, but the meaning of those appearances is not the same. Treating them as if they were creates conclusions that the documents themselves do not support. There are at least 3 distinct levels of association present in the records tied to Jeffrey Epstein, and each one carries a different evidentiary weight. The first level is documented interaction. This includes entries in flight logs or other records that show a person was present in a specific place at a specific time. When a name appears in a flight log, it indicates recorded travel. It establishes that the person was listed as a passenger on that trip. It does not, on its own, explain the purpose of the travel or activity associated with it, but it does provide a concrete data point tied to the time and location. The second level is contact or social connection. This is what the Black Book represents. A name in a contact directory indicates that there was a way to reach that person through a phone number, an assistant or office, or another channel. It reflects accessibility but not activity. In large professional and social networks, especially those involving high-profile individuals, contact lists can include hundreds of names with varying degrees of actual interaction. The presence of a name at this level shows potential communication, not participation in any specific event. The third level is allegation within a legal or investigative context. This appears in testimony, filings, and investigative documents. Here, a name may be tied to a claim that is being examined. Even at this level, the structure matters. A name can appear in a question, in an allegation, or in a response that denies involvement. Only when an allegation is supported by evidence and upheld through legal process does it move beyond that category. And by the way, keep in mind, if the left wanted to prosecute Trump for being on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, they would have had the evidence to do it, but they don't. And they would have done it too. You know they did, because didn't they take him to New York and arrest him? Yeah. What, isn't he a convicted criminal according to them? Yeah. Now, this doesn't mean I'm for Trump. I'm just saying he wasn't on Jeffrey Epstein's flight log 13 times. So the problem arises when these levels are treated interchangeable. A name in a contact book is treated as if it were evidence of participation. A name in a flight log is treated as if it were proof of wrongdoing. A name in a deposition question is treated as if it were an established allegation. So each step compresses a different type of record into a single interpretation, involvement. But the documents themselves do not support that compression. We don't know what he did on that plane with Jeffrey. Maybe they made out. Maybe, Trump bit his ear and he got mad and threw his cocktail in Trump's face. We don't know. But he wasn't on the Jeffrey Epstein list 13 times as I thought it was. We have got to stop listening to the fake news and the real fake news, which is, people spreading information on social media because they don't know. They don't have the true information. No one's doing the research. I don't know why I have to, but who else is going to do it? So my data set that I found provides a clear example of how these levels remain distinct when the records are read correctly. There is a documented social overlap between Epstein and certain public figures, including Donald Trump, yes, reflected in public reporting and in limited references within the records. There is also a single recorded instance of shared travel in a flight log that I mentioned. At the same time, the testimony that I've reviewed does not establish allegations of wrongdoing tied to that name, and the contact directly does not include a direct listing in the version that I analyzed. And man, I got so more and more and more and more and more. So the real pattern, fragmentation right now and misinterpretation. That's what it is. It's fragmented data and it's being misinterpreted by our media on purpose, politically. Because there are money engines, there are businesses, there are China is totally against Trump, right? So and it looks like China has some leverage of control over blue states and the Democrat National Committee because of how they're acting. They want a society like China. Trump is against all of this. At least that's what it looks like. So after moving through every layer of the court filings, the FBI releases the flight logs, the contact book, and the testimony that we have. The expectation is that a clear, unified picture should emerge. But that expectation is based on the same assumption that started the problem, that all these records are pieces of a single system designed to tell one complete story, and they are not. So we don't have legal proof, do we? No. We've got fragmentation through investigative processes, operational tracking, communication networks, witness examination, fragmentation through all of that. So what began as a search for answers inside the Epstein files ends with a different realization that there is no single file, no unified record, and no document that resolves every question at once. What exists instead is a layered system of records, each created for a different purpose, each constrained by its own rules, and each incomplete in its own way. Now, does the FBI or CIA or any of those have a list of perpetrators? I'm sure they do. For leverage. But the court documents tied to Jeffrey and Max versus Maxwell, or Giffrey or Jeffrey or whatever, they show how specific allegations were tested within a legal framework, and they are precise, but it's very precise, but they are very narrow. They do not attempt to map a full network, and they cannot be read as if they do. The FBI file shows how investigations moved, what was collected and what was pursued, and how information was handled. But they are filtered through legal exemptions that remove large portions of the record. They demonstrate scope, not completeness. And again, it's not those that perpetrated the stuff against minors with Jeffrey Epstein. These were against Jeffrey and Ghislaine. We don't have a record of those who were paying for underage prostitutes. Now, the flight logs show movement, right, where planes traveled, names recorded. They provide timelines and patterns, but they do not explain intent. The contact book shows communication pathways, who could be reached and how. It reflects access, not action. It is a directory, but it's not a record of participation, and Trump's name wasn't in there. Some of his people who work for him were, and I think one of his family members. So the testimony preserves the process of examining claims, questions, answers, denials, and objections. It captures competing accounts, but it's not the final determination here. When these records are separated and read within their proper context, they do not contradict each other. They align with their limits. The contradictions only appear when they are forced into a single narrative that they were never designed to support, and that is what the media has been doing to us, lying to us. And this is where the analysis becomes disciplined. A name in a flight log is a record of travel. A name in a contact book is a record of contact potential. A name in a testimony is part of a question or response. And a name in an FBI file may be part of a lead, a witness statement, or a redacted reference. Those observations do not confirm the broader claims that circulate, and they do not resolve every question. I know. What they do is define the boundary of what the available evidence supports. And that boundary is the most important outcome of this entire process. Because once it's clear where the records end, it becomes possible to separate what is known from what is assumed. And the absence of a unified archive is not a failure of the analysis. It is a characteristic of the data itself. The fragmentation, the redactions, the inconsistencies, and the compartmentalization are all part of how the record exists. And understanding that does not provide a complete narrative, sorry. But it does something more valuable. It prevents incomplete information from being treated as a certainty. It keeps conclusions anchored in evidence. And it makes clear that in a case built from fragments, clarity comes not from filling in the gaps, but from recognizing where those gaps are and refusing to go beyond what the record can support.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.